Good morning, everyone. My name is Robin Ayub. I'm the founder of the Localization Fireside Chat podcast channel. Through my podcast, I have the privilege to host insightful conversations, experts in the localization industry. It's an incredible opportunity, really, to bring together thought leaders, industry professionals, to tell their intriguing localization stories. And I find the more I talk to individuals and professionals in our industry, the more I am surprised how many intriguing stories there is as to how everybody started in the industry. We also talk on this channel about we discuss some of the trends, some of the challenges, the innovation in the industry, and very fast, the Localization Fireside Chat has become a valuable resource for anyone, really, who is passionate about the localization and translation industry. And as we dive into the captivating world of languages and demographics and human connections, I invite you all to connect with me and join me in this engaging conversation throughout my podcast. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on your favorite podcast channel. We're on all of them. And I invite you to subscribe, connect, and share and engage with this content. I am privileged and honored to have with me as a guest this morning, Brian Mossop. Brian was an instructor and he was a translator, actually, and a reviser and a trainer at the Canadian government. He's retired now. He lives here in Toronto. And I can't wait to dive deeper into his expertise from his perspective after so many years in the industry and learn from it, because there's a lot to be learned. As we look forward in our future, there's a lot to be learned from those who have done it, have experienced it, and have developed careers in this particular industry. So Brian, welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with me this morning. And if you don't mind introducing yourself to the audience.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Mossop, and I worked for the Canadian government's Translation Bureau for 40 years, from 1974 to 2014, when I retired. But from 1980 on, and still, I've been teaching at the School of Translation at York University here in Toronto, where I teach both specialized translation. My specialty is forestry, and we have a lot of trees in Canada, and revision. Revision is the main thing I teach. I also conduct regular online one-day training sessions in revision. I've done that for the United Nations, the European Commission, and other organizations, the International Maritime Organization, and several other groups. Finally, I also write about translation. I've written a textbook now in its fourth edition, called Revising and Editing for Translators. And it's used in translation schools, I believe, around the world. And I've also written some articles in translation journals about revision. So that's me.
Nice to meet you, Brian. And thanks again for being on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, we're in the presence of celebrity, an author in our industry, a teacher, teaching the new generation of our translators, young ones, how to do translation, how to become better translators. And he's still engaged after so many years in the business, retirement. And I always say this on our channel, I haven't met anybody who is 100% retired from this industry. Everybody, try to slow down a little bit, but do other things. And the passion that it's inside of each one of us who works in the industry currently, or who have worked in the industry in the past, it never extinguished. As we transform ourselves and take a metamorphosis in terms of moving on to a new chapter in our lives, etc. So, Brian, just before we dig deeper into the topic of revision, I'm intrigued, and the customers are intrigued, because industry obviously sells services to customers, are intrigued as to why revision is important. And the context of that is that, look, if I buy translation from a good translator that excellent at what they do, why revision is needed in this case? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what is revision and why is it needed?
Well, revision is the art of reading translations to find mistakes. And the reason revision is needed, even with highly qualified people who've translated in a particular specialty for years, is that everyone makes mistakes. People's attention gets distracted. They're tired at the end of the day. So everyone makes mistakes. And then revision is the art of noticing, and it's a special art of noticing that something needs to be changed. So that's basically the answer to your question.
So, so from that aspect, and we can talk a little bit more detail about it. Have you always worked in the revision capacity, or have you been a translator before? I guess let's go back a couple of steps backward and tell me a little bit. How did you start, or how did you became intrigued in this industry and decided I want to be involved in this industry? And walk me back to your first job in this industry, I guess.
Well, I became a translator by pure chance. Originally, I was a graduate student of linguistics, and I was investigating one of the indigenous languages of Canada. Then one day, I saw an ad in a local newspaper from the federal government saying translators wanted for French to English translation. So the Official Languages Act had just been passed a few years earlier. So that meant there was suddenly a huge demand for translators. So I applied, and I wrote a test, and then I received a letter inviting me to move to the national capital, Ottawa, to work. But I said, no, I don't particularly want to leave Toronto. So a year later, they said, oh, there's now a position in Toronto. So there I was. And I started work on June 10th, 1974. And so first I was just a translator. I was revised by a senior translator, and working in various specialties. Well, the government of Canada translates in practically every specialty, since the government deals with everything. And then I became a reviser just 2 years later. This is because there was a sudden influx of hundreds of new translators. There were no, I believe there were no translation schools in Canada at that time. So it was just people with language degrees. And they had to promote people to revision positions very quickly. So there I was, suddenly a reviser, and they sent me for 3 days of training as a reviser, 3 days of training every month, where someone looked at my revisions and criticized them and showed me what I'd done, where I'd changed too much and where I hadn't changed enough. And that lasted for a year or two. So I got really well trained in revision by a senior person who'd had a lot of experience doing it. And that was how I became a reviser, but I never stopped translating. For my whole career, I also translated from French to English alongside revision. And eventually I started training other translators. I became
So Brian, your specialty is French to English, the language combination. And for the audience, I'm guessing, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, that an individual can translate to their mother tongue. I'm assuming from a concept perspective. Obviously, people can have a super intelligence and they probably can translate to more than one language. But naturally speaking, somebody can translate to one or two maybe language combinations. And what's the rule around that? Is there like a specific rule around it or general understanding? How many languages can an individual translate?
Well, I think 2, maybe 3 is the maximum that anyone can do well. For the official languages in Canada, the general rule is that you translate into your mother tongue, but some people do translate in the opposite direction. In fact, one of my first assignments was they sent me to the headquarters of Canada's Weather Service, which is here in Toronto. And there was only enough work from French to English to occupy me for half a day. So on the other half day, they had me translating from English to French, which was, and of course, it's much more difficult to translate into your second language. So luckily, there was a woman there who was an English to French translator, a native speaker of French, and she revised my translations. We also revised each other just for meaning. It's sometimes said that revisers should only be revising into their native language. And that's true when it comes to language and style. But for meaning alone, you can revise in either direction. I mean, I can tell whether a translation into French means the same thing as the English source text.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about revision, and for those who are not too familiar with the exact process of revision, we are not talking about proofreading. We're not talking about grammatical errors. We're not talking, you could, but not necessarily talking about grammatical error. This is linguistic revision, just to be precise. Am I correct? Right?
Yes. The first thing you're looking for, of course, is mistranslations. And the second thing you're looking for is a style which is suited to the people who are going to be reading the translation. For example, if you're translating a public health text, you want to make sure there are not a lot of terms, medical terms that come from Latin and Greek, because they're not going to be understood by the public. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of thing you're looking for in as a reviser.
And that becomes very important in terms of addressing the content to a specific level of education by the audience, right? Am I correct?
Oh,
so
yes.
So progressing a content to a level to high school education versus university educated or PhD educated, there's different levels of complexity of the text that the reviser probably has to keep in mind. Am I correct?
Oh, yes. You have to be very sensitive to styles when you're revising.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about your university, you're teaching at York University right now in Toronto. Give me a snapshot of, who are the students? Are these young students going through their translation degrees, or are they coming from the industry to come in to take their reviser's degree? What do you think, if you don't mind, elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I teach two groups of students. One is young undergraduate students who are all translating from French to English and are learning to revise French to English translations. The other group of students are graduate students who are doing a master's degree in linguistics, in translation. And some of them do indeed come from the industry. They want to get a master's degree. So they're very different. They speak a range of languages. In that course, I typically have some people who are Chinese English translators, Farsi English, quite a range. I think last time I taught it a year ago, I had 6 or 7 different source languages.
Because I'm assuming, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming the concept of revision is independent of the language combination, correct?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So you could take a concept and apply it to any language combination you want.
Well, the basic concepts can be, but I always have to warn people who are translating in language pairs I don't have, that there may be things they need to look for which I don't know about, special cultural related things, or emphasizing a particular aspect of revision, certain particular parameters of revision they need to look at.
Yeah. And we're going to be targeting a whole bunch of topics I've got for you this morning, Brian. One of the things that people are always nowadays talking about, and as you know, like since you started in the 70s in the industry, and I see that you've started at an era where content has grown tremendously because of the language law has just passed, and I'm assuming there was a bunch of work that needs to be done, but not enough people to do it. And same thing still exists now. With the advancement of communication tools, etc., content is being created at an accelerated rate, much accelerated rate, and it's compounding every year in terms of growth. What do you think of the advancement of technology and the way we're creating the initial translation? I'm referring to, the new tools, generative AI, machine translation, etc. And there's this thing now is being created. The industry has been delivering for many years. It's called post-editing. So where do you see the revision playing a role? Do we need to modify it to accommodate the new technologies, or the same concepts still apply? How does that work?
Well, I think revision is rather different from translation. The tools that exist, whether it's translation memory or machine translation, or very recently ChatGPT, mainly apply to translation. They don't apply so much to revision. I've just been experimenting with ChatGPT to try to get it to.
How did you find it?
Well, of course, the trick with ChatGPT is asking the right question. So what I found was I gave it a French text and an English translation, and I asked it to revise the English translation for accuracy, language, and style. But that may not have been the right question to ask, because the first thing it did was it retranslated the French text instead of revising the English text. Well, of course, revision is not retranslation. That's just time wasting. So it's possible that I just asked the wrong question.
Yeah. Now, the post-editing function, which many people refers to as a light revision in a lot of cases, where you've got a machine translated output, where you probably need to verify a little bit of, just to make sure that the quality standards are there, the meanings are correctly translated, etc. So instead of the translator, beside the use of translation memory, using an actual MT output to accelerate that output from the translator, then you need to have a post-editing or light revision on that machine output to make sure that the some sort of a quality standard has been applied to the text. Have you dabbled with that type of work? Or?
Yes. Oh, yes. Well, one of the differences of opinion here is whether post-editing is a kind of revision. If you think of it from the point of view of workflow, post-editing is actually a way to translate the text in the first place. Mm-hmm. A post-edited text can then go to a reviser. So it isn't actually revision. Some people, although it feels like revision when you're doing it, it's actually an earlier step in the translation procedure. It's the original translation of the text.
So do you ever think about a way, or have you ever wondered sometime, I'm sure there are many like technologies out there that allows for automatic revision. Can the revision process be automated in any way?
No, I don't think it can.
And why is that?
It's the technique of noticing problems. And as far as I've been able to determine so far, no machine can tell you whether there's a mistranslation. And no machine can tell you whether the style, well, perhaps now ChatGPT can correct for style. although I haven't experimented with that, turn a medical text with Greek and Latin terms into a public health text. I don't know about that. But basically, revision is still something that goes on in a human brain, unlike translation, which can now be done to a great extent with a machine.
So based on what you've seen throughout your career, do you feel like revision step needs to be applied to every single text, or can revision step be modified, based on the text that you're dealing with?
Oh, no. Some people think that every text has to be seen by a second translator. In fact, the international standard, ISO 17100, says every text shall be, if you're certified under that standard, it says every text shall be. Now, the standard we have here in Canada, though, says that for every text, you have to decide whether it needs to be seen by a second translator. So you need criteria for deciding whether a text needs to be seen by a second translator. So some texts do, some texts don't. Also, you can revise just part of a text and then decide that, while I've revised 5 pages and I haven't found any problems. There's a risk in that, but then there's a risk in everything. So,
correct. There are the ISO standards are well known, and everybody who is certified by ISO, I guess, and audited on a yearly basis, they need to abide by those rules. But it's always the struggle between how much work this industry has since 1974 till now has created. Every year we look behind, we say, well, content has grown by X amount of percentage per year. I mean, the average is about 20 to 25 per year. But some years, we like the year after COVID, content grew by almost 30-40% because there was there's some backlogs there, and it has to be, and it made it to the forefront. With all this content growth, the amount of translators, and you can agree to that we need to turn them into revisers. Basically, we don't have any of them. We don't have as many of them. I mean, we should have more, obviously, to satisfy the entire industry, globally and locally. But we're not getting more of those revisers. So I guess we are at a fork in the road. We either the process has to be modified, or we need more people to do more work. What do you any comments on that?
Well, first of all, there's peer revision. You can just exchange with someone. If you work in an office, you can just revise each other's texts, or at least a selection of each other's texts, not all of them. And if you're freelance, you can hook up with other freelancers and say, well, I think I'd like to have this text looked at for a particular aspect. Do you think I've used the right terminology? Do you think it's the right style?
Correct.
So there's no way of revising everything. It has to be reduced, based perhaps on who translated it. If it's a person who's new to a field, they've never done any finance translation, for example, then all their texts should be revised for at least a couple of months.
Yep.
And then you gradually reduce the amount of revision. So there are ways of reducing revision. And of course, you don't always need to do a comparison with the source text. Sometimes you can just read the translation and just glance at the source text occasionally if there's a problem.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is a spot checking, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
So take me back a little bit to your days in the public sector when you were working for the government. So what has changed? What did you see the progression of changes throughout the Bureau, for instance, since 1974 till when you retired in 2014? You must have seen leaps and bounds of technology, directions, amount of work, number of employees, a process, public-private relationship. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, when I started, I was working on a manual typewriter, and then it was an electrified typewriter. Then it was an IBM Selectric typewriter, and then eventually, around in the mid 1980s, I first got a desktop computer. The one big change that happened is that there used to be more translators in the Translation Bureau. At one point, there were well over 1,000 translators just for the two official languages. And gradually, the amount that was outsourced to the private sector increased. I think that was part of the neoliberal trend to promote the private sector. When a conservative government came into power in 1983, I think it started to promote sending more work out to the private sector and receiving bids from freelancers to do jobs. So I was spending more time doing quality control of freelance work, whereas previously it had been all in-house work. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the big change. As for technology, translation, of course, computers themselves appeared, and the single biggest thing that happened was in 1998 when Google appeared, because that changed research. Mm-hmm. Research on the subject matter of your text. Before that, I had to go out to university libraries and find journals on the topic on the shelves. It took hours and hours. And suddenly with Google, I could just sit there and information would just pop up on the screen in front of me. That was the single biggest change.
I tell you, you mentioned the physical research, like actually going through the books and trying to find things. I remember, visiting one of our offices and I've seen like racks and racks of books and dictionaries for various topics. And that was like, for you and for the audience who don't know me much, I've been in the industry for almost over 2 decades now. So yes, I also started a long time ago, and I've seen a lot of changes. I've seen our, translators running to the libraries, our own internal library, and picking up, like, let's say they're working on a telecom project, picking up a dictionary that deals with telecom and, try to verify things. Part of the translation, today, everybody's in the consumer world, everything's at your fingertips. You want something done, you download an app, you go to, get it done. But not too long ago, a few years ago, that was not the case at all. You actually had to go and do some research. And in fact, out of souvenir, I brought 2 big dictionaries, and just to, we were, getting rid of them because we moved to digital, et cetera. I said, I'd like to keep a couple of souvenirs, and one of them 2 dictionaries, and they're pretty large books on various topics. So it's pretty cool to see the transformation from, and the amount of information that is available now for translators. So, the translation job or function or services that has been offered throughout the years, from somebody translating an official document, be it a passport or CV or, a birth certificate for somebody, and officially stamping it. That means that it's been done by a certified translator. That's another topic altogether. When we talk about certification of translators, when we, a few years ago, and as you mentioned it earlier, Brian, where, at the beginning, if you speak the language, you have a language degree, perhaps you could become a translator. So come on. And that was the norm. I mean, if you speak the language, you can do some translation, and that's fine. Now there's some, I would say, forms around the profession. So we put some boundaries around it. We put some certification. There are some training, official training, and you're involved in that in your university, York University. So it is not as, I want to say, free fall for everybody who speaks languages now, but still today it's hard for the consumer to decipher, is this job being done correctly? And you hear people complaining about, oh, it wasn't, this job, it was not done correctly. But meanwhile, from the revisor perspective, no, it's done correctly, but maybe not to the liking of the customer.
Yes, I often had complaints from our customers about a text, and generally, when I showed it to the manager, who was also a translator, they said, "Well, there's nothing wrong with this. It's just that the client actually knows the two languages, and they've just made up their own translation." And they say, "Well, it's not quite right. It wasn't literal enough for them."
So where do you see the industry? I know you're still teaching revision right now, and it's great that you're doing that. I hope we have many individuals who wants to contribute to the education of the new generation in the future. But where do you see the industry going in terms of all the tools that you're aware of, and they're coming to the industry in I mean, I just got on a daily basis, I get somebody with a brand new idea from a technology perspective, trying to either speed up the process, the administrative process, or speed up the translation process, or some sort of a process to deal with efficiency in our industry. Where do you see the industry going from your perspective?
Well, my view of the future is that no one knows the future.
Okay.
That is, human beings, I think, are very bad at predicting what's going to happen.
We speculate a lot.
Yes, you could. Now, of course, it depends what you mean by the future. If you mean just 6 months from now or a year from now, that's a little different. But if you mean where are things going over the next decade or 2 decades, I think the answer is no one knows. Yeah,
the short-term one, that's what I meant. And in technology, I'm always reminded that technology is accelerating at a rapid rate. We can't measure it in years. Years would be in a different world altogether. I'm more thinking about 6 months to a year, maybe a year and a half down the road. And, regardless of how we see this, I think there is two competing philosophies in our industry. The one that is, focusing on automation and, process improvement and doing things a lot faster than what we're doing right now for the sheer content that we're dealing with. And the other part, I would compare it to the artisan way of continuous, doing things. If you have 2 bakeries in your neighborhood, one that produce bread via machines and output as many as they want in terms of bread, and you got another bakery who's actually, do things by hand, carefully, put the, bake and put the products on the shelves, etc. Those 2 different things. And you have 2 different customers for those. You've got a customer who just want to walk in, pay for it, and walk out. And you got another customer that, take pride in what they're buying, and they want to actually pay a little extra to get a better product. And I think those 2 philosophies are competing within the same industry. And CSA research put the industry around 19,000 companies globally, and they're increasing on a day-to-day basis. So, based on what I just said, any comments on this school of thoughts?
Well, I once wrote in an article that if you can't translate with pencil and paper, then you can't translate with any machine, any technology. There's a certain...
Back to fundamental meaning.
Yes. There's a certain basic mental ability that only a human brain can do. Mm-hmm. It's a bit of an illusion to think that a machine can do it for you. You have to be very careful not to overestimate the power of machines. I've read a bit of research that shows that some people who post-edit machine outputs don't actually look at the source text very much. They tend to just because it reads so well, mm-hmm. with machine translation, because the text reads so well, they tend to think, well, obviously, if this sentence reads so well, it's probably a good translation. But is it? How can you know unless you look at the source text?
Did we translate it correctly? I guess that's your question. Okay, it reads
Yeah.
well, fine, but is that what we meant to translate? Is that what you mean?
Hmm.
So I absolutely agree. Like, you need to, at least get the meaning correctly for what you're trying to translate, especially when it comes to, specific document. Like if you're working on a contract or you're working on, some a drug description or, something really, you need to be careful of the meanings. Everything needs to be careful of the meaning. It doesn't matter what content it is, but that's the job of the translator, conveying the exact meaning from the source language to the target language. The question is, and it's a consumer question. For the translator, everybody wants to do the best job possible, take their time, get the text correctly. But from a consumer perspective, I think the tolerance of I don't want to call it bad translation, but I'm just calling it the tolerance, the less scrutiny it's becoming, and also, with all the standards that we've got around, I read three languages, and sometimes I get a user manual for a machine that I bought for the house or small device or whatever the heck, power tools, etc. And I'm reading the user manual in English, so I understand in English. The other two languages, there's a lot of mistranslation in there. If I apply what I need to assemble to one of these languages, I will never be able to assemble that device. So the translation, it's not correct. But people, I don't know if they complain about it or not. I have no idea, but I feel like the tolerance of quality, instead of inching it up, from a consumer perspective, I think the tolerance is little down a little bit.
Yes, we can't get into a situation where we're letting machines make our decisions for us. The output is very useful, but it's only useful if we then apply our brains to that output.
Mm-hmm.
I just read my partner just bought a pair of clippers to clip our cat's claws. And on the front, there's a picture showing you that you mustn't clip too far up because otherwise you'll hit the part of the claw that's still alive. Well, that part in English is called the quick. And that came out in French because everything in Canada is labeled in both languages. That came out in French as rapide, rapid.
Oh, okay.
Which of course has nothing to do with it. Now on the back, it had instructions where it was all correct, where they talked about dealing with the living part, making sure that you don't touch the living part of the claw. But I think the front part that I just mentioned, I think that had come from a machine. I suspect very strongly that had come from a machine, and no one had bothered to notice that. Correct.
So you're right. You still have to apply, but everybody I talk to, everybody agrees that machines are learning fast, especially with the neural MT that we talk about. So the science behind neural learning patterns, et cetera, is increasing, and it's becoming more effective in terms of that, increasing the accuracy and increasing the better output we're getting. Like the statistical machine translation that we started with in the early 2000s is much different than what it is right now. I think it was 2012, if memory corrects me. Memory treats me well on this one. When we started with statistical machine translation, and now we moved to a neural MT, etc. So human is learning as adapting technology as we are moving along here. But I agree with you. I wrote a blog a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, about the need for coexistence between human and machines for a long time. And so you need to have boundaries, and you need to ensure certainty of content when the output is coming from a machine. I do agree that we need both because of what the pressure is coming to in terms of how many contents we have to deal with. But I do agree with you, human needs to be in the middle.
Yes, well, a big challenge, I think, for the people who are trying to improve machine translation is seeing beyond the sentence. There's still huge problems with pronoun references. I just looked at a translation from a Romance language. I'm not sure which one it was, into English. And there was a reference in it to a table, which in that Romance language was a feminine noun. And so the table was referred to in several sentences after it was first introduced. And the first time it was correctly translated by the English pronoun it, or to a table as it. But in the next sentence, it was she.
Oh, I see.
And believe it or not, 3 sentences later, it was he.
Oh, well. So you're right. The context is very important.
Sentence.
Correct. So the context in which way you're using these words, it cannot, the problem is the human brain is an emotional and logical brain, and then machines are all mathematics and formulas and algorithms. And, we look for pattern in a sort of, my background is technology. So from what I, used to do when I was a programmer is you look for, you write logic, you write, specific steps, you look for things that they're clearly identifiable. And, your human brain, that's why, when I asked you, so when you think about the industry in the next few months, a year, the human brain jump into like, I'm going to figure it out. But the machines probably, if I tell, if I ask ChatGPT, what do you think is going to happen in the next 6 months to a year? I'll get a very probably scientific answer. Maybe I should try that. Get a scientific answer based on some news that have been analyzed over time. And here's the conclusion.
Well, that's a good idea. Yes.
Excellent. So we're coming on our, and it's really intriguing to be talking revision and translation fundamentals with you, Brian. I really appreciate your time with me this morning. Any last comments for the audience or for the channel before we terminate? Any comments to me?
Well, I guess you can say that the proof, when it comes to using technologies, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. We'll see what happens. There's too much hype, too much talk about how wonderful everything is going to be. So I guess that's what I would say. We don't want to reject machines, but on the other hand, we want to be very careful and not believe all the hype.
Absolutely. So again, words of wisdom. Thank you, Brian, for being with me this morning. I really appreciate your time. Thanks to the audience for watching this video and sharing this video and liking it. Hopefully it engaged a little bit of some intriguing thoughts and some intriguing ideas for you. If you need more information about this conversation, please reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with Brian. Thank you so much, everybody, for being on the channel this morning. And thanks, Brian, for being with me. And you are welcome to come back to this channel anytime you want. Thank you.